Welcome to Silent Queen's Reckoning. I'm so glad you could join us today. Now let's dive right into the story.
First day after our wedding, he hopped me before family, but they did not know I could destroy everything in a day. 3 years earlier, on the first morning after their wedding, Grant Hale struck Caroline Arden across the face before 40 members of his family. The sound cut through the breakfast room at the Hale estate. Silver cutlery stopped against china. Grant's mother, Judith, sat at the head of the table in pearls, her mouth pressed into a line of satisfaction. Grant's cousin lowered his phone but did not put it away. At the far end of the room, Brielle Stone stood beside the flower arrangements in a pale dress, pretending to be shocked while hiding the smallest lift at the corner of her mouth. The argument had begun over one chair. Caroline's late mother had placed a hand-painted blue chair at the wedding breakfast table as a gift for the couple. Grant's family had moved it to the side before guests arrived. Brielle, then Grant's executive assistant, had taken the chair and laughed when Caroline asked her to move. Judith called Caroline possessive. Grant told her to stop embarrassing him. When Caroline quietly lifted the chair and placed it back at the table, Brielle complained that Caroline had pushed her. Grant did not ask what happened. He crossed the room and hit Caroline hard enough to turn her head toward the windows. The blue chair fell over behind her. For several seconds, no one stood. Judith told Caroline that a new wife should learn not to provoke a man in front of his relatives. Grant's uncle said successful marriages required women to understand when to be silent. Brielle touched Grant's sleeve and tried to look frightened, though her eyes stayed fixed on the red mark rising across Caroline's cheek. Caroline did not cry. She bent, lifted her mother's chair from the floor, and carried it to the empty side of the room. Her wedding ring felt too tight. Grant followed her into the hall and apologized in the way he always would later, not for the violence, but for the inconvenience of witnesses. He said the family had pressured him. He said Brielle had misunderstood. He said Caroline should return to breakfast and smile so the photographs would not look strange. Caroline returned because she was 26, newly married, and still believed a private apology could repair a public wound. That day taught Grant the wrong lesson. He learned that he could make Caroline swallow humiliation if he called it a family matter. Judith learned that her son would defend cruelty if it protected the Hale name. Brielle learned that Caroline's place could be tested in front of an audience. Over the next 3 years, the tests became routine. Brielle joined every holiday dinner. Judith compared Caroline's clothes to Brielle's. Grant dismissed Caroline's work for the Arden Trust as a harmless hobby, then used trust-funded company credit to expand Hale Urban. Whenever Caroline objected, he reminded her of the breakfast room and warned that divorce would make her look unstable, ungrateful, and alone. Caroline did not forget the blue chair. She kept it in the library at Arden Estate, the private villa that Grant later called his executive residence. Every time she passed it, she remembered the exact faces around the breakfast table and the silence that had protected the hand that hit her. 3 years later, when Caroline returned early from Geneva and found Grant asleep beside Brielle in her silk robe, she understood that the affair had not begun in a hotel room. It began at that breakfast table, when everyone who claimed to be family watched Grant hurt her and expected her to stay. At 2 a.m, Caroline Arden opened the bedroom door of her private villa and found her husband asleep beside another woman in Caroline's silk robe. She did not scream. She lifted her phone and recorded the room. Grant Hale woke first. His eyes moved from the camera to Caroline's suitcase, then to the woman against his chest. The color left his face. Brielle Stone pulled the duvet over herself. The cream robe slipped from one shoulder. Caroline recognized the hand-stitched blue flowers near the cuff. Her mother had given her the robe after surgery 3 years earlier. Grant moved off the bed. "You were supposed to be in Geneva until next Friday." Caroline turned the camera toward the 2 champagne glasses, Sienna's dresses inside the open wardrobe, and a framed photograph of Grant and Sienna on the bedside table. Grant reached for the phone. Caroline stepped back. He stopped. Sienna pushed herself upright and tightened the robe. "Grant said you never used this house." Caroline looked at her. Sienna's chin rose. "He said the villa was his." Grant glanced at her with irritation. That glance told Caroline the affair was already cracking under the first direct question. She had returned to Connecticut to surprise her husband after closing an investment agreement in Europe. Grant told her he was sleeping at the villa because Hale Urban Group was preparing a major waterfront acquisition. He said late meetings made the drive to Manhattan difficult. The estate gate recognized Caroline's fingerprint because Arden Estate belonged to the Arden Family Trust. Grant had lived there for 6 weeks. Sienna had moved in 4 weeks earlier. Their belongings filled the room. Caroline continued recording as she walked into the dressing area. Sienna's jewelry covered the vanity. Her shoes filled the lower shelves. Grant's suits hung beside new men's shirts Caroline had never seen. On the desk lay a stack of documents titled Spousal Share Transfer. Caroline picked them up. Grant crossed the room. Those are drafts. The board needs a cleaner ownership structure before the Crown Harbor deal. The documents transferred Caroline's voting shares in Hale Urban Group to Grant for $1. The signature line remained empty. Sienna watched from the bed. You said she had already agreed, she said. Grant turned sharply. Stay out of this. Caroline placed the papers beside the champagne. Sienna folded her arms. A regional vice presidency after the acquisition. Sienna hesitated. Grant's face hardened. Sienna. Caroline aimed the camera at him. Sienna looked at Grant, then at Caroline. Confidence returned when she mistook Caroline's calm for weakness. He said you were dependent on him. He said you had no real career, no family influence, and no ability to fight a divorce. Once you signed the shares over, he planned to give you a small settlement and send you back to whatever town you came from. Grant grabbed a shirt from the floor. Caroline ended the recording and uploaded it to a secure account. Grant pulled on his trousers. We can solve this privately. A divorce, he stared at her. Then his fear disappeared beneath contempt. Caroline looked around the bedroom. It means you stop sleeping with your secretary in my house. Grant's expression shifted. He had never studied the source of the money that kept arriving exactly when he needed it. Caroline picked up the share transfer documents. No. I think you want the recording kept private until the papers are signed. Grant's jaw tightened. Sienna climbed out of bed and held the robe closed. If you're divorcing him, why are you taking the house? Caroline looked at the woman standing barefoot on her carpet. Because it was never his to give you. She walked downstairs, collected her suitcase, and left through the front entrance. Behind her, Grant shouted her name. The gate closed between them. Caroline sat in the waiting car and opened her contact list. She did not call her father first. She called the chair of Hale Urban Group's audit committee. Preserve every file related to Crown Harbor, she said, especially anything approved by Grant Hale or Brielle Stone. Then she called the Arden Trust attorney. Prepare the divorce waiver. He keeps every asset titled in his name. I retain all separate trust property and voting rights. The attorney paused. Caroline looked back at the dark villa. Only then did she call her father. Richard Arden answered on the first ring. Behind his voice came the muted sound of an overseas boardroom, papers moving and people waiting for him to return. She had planned to sound calm. Instead, the first breath caught in her throat. The boardroom sound stopped. Richard waited. He had warned her about Grant years earlier, but he did not use the moment to prove himself right. Caroline looked through the rear window. The villa light still glowed above the trees. Grant was probably blaming Sienna. Sienna was probably demanding the house he had promised her. Both still believed Caroline would cry for a few days, accept a settlement, and disappear. Destroy everything, she said. Richard's answer was immediate. That question steadied her. Her father would give her resources, but he would not turn pain into a reckless order. Destroy every false privilege he built with our money. End the personal guarantees. Freeze any new capital that requires Arden approval. Preserve the employees, active construction, payroll, and legitimate clients. I don't want the company burned. I want every lie holding him above it removed. Richard spoke to someone beside him. A meeting was moved. A legal team was called. No dramatic promise followed. You remain chair of the trust, he said. The decision must be yours. Then we begin with records. Nothing moves until the audit confirms it. Caroline closed her eyes for 1 second. Come home when you're ready, not because you need rescue, because this door is yours too. The call ended. By sunrise, the Arden Trust had paused 3 pending approvals linked to Grant. Not one employee payment stopped. Not one contractor lost a scheduled transfer. Only Grant's private expansion plan, Sienna's promotion package, and the Crown Harbor Bridge request were held for review. Grant would later call it an attack. It was not. It was the first morning in years when Caroline stopped paying for the weapons pointed at her. Grant arrived at his lawyer's office at 8:40 the next morning. Caroline arrived at 8:55 in a red dress and a black coat. She had slept for 2 hours at a hotel, showered, and placed every piece of evidence into 3 separate archives. Grant stood when she entered. He looked from the red dress to her empty left hand. His attorney brought them into a conference room. Grant had prepared his own version. Caroline would waive the Manhattan apartment, company stock, investment accounts, vehicles, and any claim to future income. In return, he would give her $500,000. Caroline crossed out the payment. Grant leaned back. The attorney looked at Caroline. Mrs. Hale, the apartment and some accounts may qualify as marital property. Grant tapped the table. I renovated that house. His attorney found the clause. Grant stopped tapping. Caroline continued. My original Hale Urban shares remain mine. They were transferred before marriage and listed in the agreement. Grant's eyes narrowed. He believed Caroline owned 3%, a ceremonial stake his late mentor had given her. He did not know that her shares carried enhanced voting rights tied to the Arden credit facility. Caroline signed. Grant signed after her. The agreement became binding once filed. Outside the law office, Grant followed her toward the elevators. Caroline pressed the elevator button. His face changed. The executive residence agreement ended when you signed the divorce settlement. The trust attorney sent notice at 9:30. Grant checked his phone. 27 unread messages waited. One came from the estate manager. Access privileges terminate at noon. Personal property will be inventoried and delivered to the Manhattan apartment. Sienna called before he finished reading. Grant answered. Her voice carried from the phone. The bedroom doors had locked automatically. Estate staff waited downstairs with packing boxes. Her fingerprint no longer opened the gate. Grant glared at Caroline. He went still. Caroline had found the payments during the night. No. The estate staff are using the private service entrance. Your secretary invited the neighbors by screaming at security. The elevator arrived. Caroline entered. Grant blocked the door with one hand. Caroline looked at him. The doors closed on his hand before he pulled it back. At noon, Sienna left Arden Estate through the main gate because she refused the service exit. 2 photographers waited outside. She had called one of them herself, expecting to present a story about a cruel, abandoned wife. Instead, the cameras recorded estate staff loading her clothes into a hired van while the deed notice remained posted at the gate. Property owner, Arden Family Trust. Authorized resident, Caroline Arden. Grant watched the video from his office. For the first time, he searched the Arden Family Trust. The public results showed almost nothing. That reassured him. It should not have. Caroline returned to Arden Estate that afternoon. The staff had removed Grant and Sienna's belongings. Fresh linens covered the bed. The champagne glasses sat inside an evidence box. Caroline's robe had been sealed separately. She did not enter the bedroom immediately. The estate manager handed her an inventory. Sienna had used the house for company meetings, fashion shoots, and private client dinners. Grant had listed Arden Estate in Crown Harbor documents as a Hale executive property. He had offered the villa as collateral for a short-term bridge loan. The lender had not yet verified the deed. Caroline called the lender. The collateral disappeared from the application within an hour. Without Arden Estate, the Crown Harbor loan fell $30 million short. Grant called. She opened the Crown Harbor summary on her tablet. The acquisition price is inflated by 18%. Sienna's consulting company receives a $4 million placement fee. 2 environmental reports are missing. Which part should I understand first? Silence. Grant ended the call. Caroline walked through the villa. In the study, she found a locked drawer. The estate manager opened it under the inventory order. Inside were client lists, unsigned transfer forms, and a second phone. The phone belonged to Sienna. She had left it charging behind a stack of reports. Caroline did not open private messages. She handed it to the trust attorney for return and preservation under the company review. The visible lock screen notifications were enough. Grant, delete the Crown Harbor fee schedule. Grant, she signed the divorce. We are clear. Grant, the Arden stake is too small to matter. Caroline photographed the notifications before the screen went dark. At 6, the Hale Urban Board announced an emergency meeting for Friday. Grant objected. The enhanced voting shareholder had requested it. He called his CFO. The CFO said he needed to check. Grant demanded an answer. 20 minutes later, the CFO entered his office carrying the original capital agreement. The Arden Family Trust held 38% economic ownership through preferred shares and 52% voting control if the company breached debt or governance terms. The trust had never activated the control. Grant read the name of its beneficiary. Caroline Elise Arden. He sat down. The CFO placed the Crown Harbor compliance notice beside the agreement. Unauthorized collateral, related party consulting fee, suppressed environmental review. The governance trigger was active. Caroline now controlled the vote. Grant arrived at Arden Estate that night. The gate did not open. He pressed the intercom until Caroline answered. Caroline looked at the screen. Grant stood outside the gate in a tailored coat, accusing the woman he had planned to trick out of her shares. Grant lowered his voice. He looked toward his phone. The audit committee had preserved company call records. Grant's face tightened. Caroline had found the relationship through public corporate records. Sienna's $4 million fee returned to the same family group selling the property. The acquisition was designed to move company money into their private accounts. "You don't know the whole structure," Grant said. She ended the intercom. Grant remained outside for 10 minutes. The gate stayed closed. Sienna moved into Grant's Manhattan apartment and immediately began behaving like the new Mrs. Hale. She posted photographs from the balcony. She wore Caroline's missing diamond earrings. She announced that difficult transitions reveal true love. Caroline did not respond. The earrings had been insured under the Arden Trust. The trust attorney sent a return demand with the purchase record. Sienna posted another photograph wearing them. Then she received notice that the items were stolen trust property. She deleted the post. At the office, employees watched Grant's private life spread across business pages. Crown Harbor partners requested explanations. The company's stock price fell 6%. Grant called a staff meeting. He described the divorce as a private matter. He promised the Arden Trust remained a passive investor. The lobby screen changed behind him. Emergency board meeting, Friday, 10 a.m., requested by Caroline Arden, voting chair, Arden Family Trust. Employees began searching Caroline's name. Her biography appeared on the trust site for the first time. London-trained investment strategist. Director of Hospital, Housing, and Infrastructure Portfolios. Lead negotiator on the Geneva Transit Agreement completed that week. The overseas trip Grant dismissed as his wife's little consulting project was a $2 billion public infrastructure negotiation. Grant left the staff meeting without finishing. Sienna entered his office. Grant turned toward her. "Your fee created the governance breach." Sienna stared at him. Their voices carried through the glass wall. Employees heard enough. By evening, 3 department heads submitted written concerns to the audit committee. Grant blamed Sienna. Sienna saved the messages, proving he designed the fee. Neither trusted the other by Friday. The emergency board meeting began at 10 in Hale Urban's 42nd floor conference room. Grant sat at the head of the table. Caroline entered through the main doors. 12 directors stood. Grant did not. Sienna waited outside with a presentation folder and no invitation. Caroline took the seat opposite Grant rather than asking him to move. The audit chair opened with Arden Estate. Grant had pledged it without authority. Then Crown Harbor. The purchase price exceeded independent valuation. The environmental review showed expensive contamination. The $4 million consulting fee benefited the seller's family. Grant signed every approval. He leaned forward. "Crown Harbor is a strategic acquisition. Delays will cost the company." Caroline displayed an alternative. The company could acquire only the clean waterfront parcels at the verified price. The contaminated section would remain with the seller. The consulting fee would disappear. The revised deal saved $42 million. The directors read the summary. Grant looked at Caroline. The board approved Caroline's version 9 votes to 3. Sienna's uncle accepted within an hour because his company faced its own debt deadline. Crown Harbor survived. Sienna's fee did not. Grant's warning that Caroline would destroy jobs vanished from the table. The next item was executive conduct. The bedroom recording did not play. Caroline submitted only the portion where Grant discussed taking her shares and promoting Sienna after the transfer. Both were company matters. Grant heard his own voice. "Once she signs, the Arden stake is useless." Sienna's voice followed. "Then I get the regional office and the villa." The room went silent. Grant said the conversation was private fantasy. The unsigned share transfer papers appeared. His attorney had drafted them. Sienna's promotion plan appeared. Grant had approved it. The fantasy had paperwork. The board voted to suspend Grant for 60 days pending review. Caroline abstained. He lost without her vote. Sienna attempted to enter the boardroom after the vote. Security stopped her. She shouted that Grant had promised her a promotion. The doors opened as directors exited. Every person heard. Grant stepped into the corridor. Sienna laughed. Grant saw cameras at the far end of the corridor. Employees had gathered near the elevators. She opened her folder and threw printed messages across the floor. One landed at Caroline's feet. Grant, after the transfer, I control everything. Another, the villa is Caroline's on paper. She will sign it over when I threaten the allowance. Another, you will be Mrs. Hale before the year ends. Grant tried to collect them. Sienna stepped on his hand. Security separated them. Caroline picked up nothing. The audit team collected every page. Sienna looked at Caroline. The correction ended Sienna's attempt to become an innocent witness. Security escorted her out. Grant returned to his office to pack, but he did not leave quietly. Before noon, 3 directors loyal to the Hale family filed an emergency objection to the suspension. Grant's lawyers argued that the Arden Trust had activated its voting rights through a marital dispute and that Caroline had secretly coordinated the audit to seize control. A judge issued a narrow temporary order preserving Grant's access until a hearing could determine whether the board vote had been properly noticed. Grant returned to the executive floor before sunset. His badge worked again, and he made sure every employee saw it. He removed the interim team from the CEO suite, locked the audit staff out of 2 financial systems, and sent a company-wide message describing himself as the victim of an attempted family takeover. The message never mentioned Arden Estate, Sienna's fee, or the forged collateral. It showed an old photograph of Grant beside his late father and warned that outsiders were trying to erase 3 generations of work. The attack worked. Several senior managers hesitated to support Caroline. 2 lenders paused their approvals until the court clarified control. Crown Harbor's seller threatened to cancel the corrected agreement. Employees began asking whether payroll was safe. The stock price fell again, and financial television reduced the case to a simple fight between a betrayed wife and a famous CEO. Sienna struck at the same time. She released a shortened piece of Caroline's bedroom recording. The edited clip began with Caroline holding a phone over the bed and ended before the share transfer papers appeared. Sienna presented herself as a frightened employee secretly filmed by a billionaire heiress. She claimed Caroline had known about the affair for months and had returned to the villa only to manufacture a public reason for removing Grant. The clip spread faster than the correction. Reporters waited outside Arden Estate. Protesters appeared at the gate with signs accusing Caroline of abusing wealth to punish another woman. Sienna gave one polished interview in a dark suit, describing Grant as controlling and Caroline as even more powerful. She admitted the affair only after making herself look trapped between 2 families. Caroline's first attempt to answer failed. The estate housekeeper had seen Sienna living at Arden Estate and had found the share transfer drafts days before Caroline returned, but she withdrew her statement hours before the court hearing. Grant's private investigator had visited her brother's small contracting firm and reminded him that Hale Urban controlled most of its work. The housekeeper feared her family would lose everything. Without that witness, Grant's lawyers persuaded the judge to extend the temporary order for 7 days. Grant celebrated by entering the Hale Club with Sienna on his arm. Their alliance had repaired itself because both needed Caroline defeated. Sienna wore a new ring, and Grant allowed photographers to capture it. They wanted the city to believe the affair had become a legitimate partnership while the wife hid behind gates and lawyers. Grant then used the company credit line as a weapon. A covenant allowed the serving CEO to request a protective hold during a control dispute. He froze discretionary spending, including legal costs for the audit committee and part of the Crown Harbor Reserve. Contractor payments remained technically available, but only through his approval. He expected delayed invoices to create anger against Caroline's board challenge. For 3 days, his plan succeeded. Construction crews reduced shifts. A supplier stopped deliveries. The interim chief operating officer considered resigning after Grant threatened to sue her personally. One independent director changed his position and supported a settlement that would return Grant to full control in exchange for canceling Sienna's promotion and repaying a small portion of the expenses. Richard Arden offered to inject enough money to break the freeze, but Caroline refused an immediate rescue. If her father simply paid every bill, Grant's story about foreign capital taking the company would become stronger. She needed the company to survive through rights it already held, not through a new check written in anger. Caroline went back to the original lending documents. She found that Grant could freeze discretionary funds, but he could not delay protected construction payments without certifying an actual insolvency risk. He had sent the certification that morning. It stated that Hale Urban might fail within 30 days unless he remained CEO. That statement created a new problem for him. The company was bidding on a city redevelopment project whose rules barred any bidder claiming imminent insolvency. Grant had told the bank the company was near failure and told the city it had exceptional financial strength. Both statements carried his signature. Caroline sent neither document to the press. She sent each institution the other document. The city requested an explanation. The bank opened a covenant review. Grant rushed to withdraw the insolvency certification, but the bank had already logged it. His protective hold ended because he refused to confirm the company was actually at risk. Contractor payments resumed before the first payroll deadline. Grant still controlled the office, and Sienna still controlled the public story. They shifted again. Sienna contacted the Crown Harbor seller through her uncle and offered a private guarantee if the seller abandoned Caroline's corrected deal. Grant promised to restore the original inflated price once the court returned permanent control. The seller accepted and announced that negotiations with Hale Urban had failed. The announcement hit during a live investor call. Grant entered the call uninvited and blamed Caroline's inexperience. He declared that her interference had destroyed the largest project in company history. For several minutes, the investors believed him. Then the seller's finance director contacted Caroline privately. Sienna's uncle had promised a guarantee using Arden Estate. The document included a copy of the same false authorization already under review. Grant and Sienna were trying to pledge Caroline's villa a second time, even after the deed had been shown to the board. Caroline asked the finance director to join the investor call. He appeared on the screen and confirmed the guarantee had failed. He also confirmed that the seller would accept Caroline's clean parcel proposal if Hale Urban provided a valid deposit before midnight. Grant had frozen the deposit account and believed Caroline could not move the money. What he had forgotten was that the project reserve belonged to a joint venture, not the operating account. The chief operating officer retained authority to release it under the corrected board resolution. She did so while Grant watched. The deposit arrived at 11:47. Crown Harbor returned under Caroline's terms. The inflated fee disappeared. Sienna's uncle lost the contaminated land sale, and the construction schedule resumed. Investors who had listened to Grant predict disaster watched the deal close 13 minutes before his deadline. Sienna responded by releasing more messages, but this time she made a mistake. One screenshot showed Grant asking her to move the cheap environmental report out of the board folder. Another showed Sienna agreeing in exchange for the regional vice presidency. She deleted the images within minutes. Hundreds of people had already saved them. The court hearing resumed the next morning. Caroline brought the full recording, the unedited estate footage, the lender contradiction, the failed second pledge of Arden Estate, and Sienna's deleted screenshot. The housekeeper also returned. Caroline had moved her brother's contracts into an independently reviewed supplier pool, removing Grant's power to threaten the family. The witness no longer needed bravery that could cost everyone around her. The judge dissolved the temporary order. Grant's argument that the dispute was purely marital failed because he had used company systems, lender certifications, and false property documents during the 7 days he regained access. His badge shut off again before he reached the lobby. Sienna waited outside the courthouse, expecting him to protect her. Grant walked past without looking at her. He had already instructed his lawyers to describe her as the source of the false guarantee. She learned about it from a reporter holding the filed statement. For the first time, both opponents understood that Caroline's revenge would not be one dramatic order from her father. They had enough money, lawyers, directors, lenders, media contacts, and private evidence to fight. They could delay her, embarrass her, and force her to defend every step. They could not make the same false document become true. The company did not collapse after Grant's second suspension. The chief operating officer took temporary control. Crown Harbor closed under the corrected terms. The lenders restored the bridge facility after Arden Estate was removed. Employees received a message confirming no layoffs. Grant watched the announcements from his apartment. Sienna no longer lived there. She had moved to a hotel and sent him a demand for $2 million in promised compensation. Grant refused. She threatened to release every message. He called Caroline. Caroline stood in the Arden Estate study while estate workers removed the false executive property plaques. He ended the call. That afternoon, Sienna sent the audit committee a copy of the Crown Harbor messages and expense records. She requested immunity from termination. The company rejected immunity. It offered credit for cooperation. Sienna accepted. Her evidence revealed an apartment, luxury travel, jewelry, and consulting payments charged through Hale Urban. Grant had approved all of them. The amount reached $1.8 million. Sienna had also billed personal expenses without his knowledge. The total exceeded another $600,000. Both became responsible for repayment. Grant's mother, Eleanor Hale, arrived at Arden Estate on Sunday. She wore a pearl suit and brought 2 lawyers. The gate admitted her as a scheduled visitor. Caroline met her in the front sitting room. Eleanor placed the divorce agreement on the table. Caroline placed the deed beside it. Arden Family Trust, purchased 6 years before marriage. Eleanor read the date. Eleanor's mouth tightened. One lawyer touched Eleanor's arm, advising silence without words. She ignored him. His father sold control to the Arden Trust during the recession. Eleanor knew. Her eyes confirmed it. Grant did not. His father had hidden the rescue to preserve his pride and prepared Grant to lead without telling him the family no longer controlled the vote. Eleanor stood. The answer unsettled Eleanor more than revenge. She left without another threat. Grant returned after his 60-day suspension for the final board review. He prepared a presentation showing revenue growth under his leadership. He listed towers built, contracts won, and awards received. Caroline presented the other half: debt hidden through short-term loans, client rebates used to inflate revenue, executive expenses charged to projects, environmental risks suppressed, qualified managers removed after questioning Sienna. Grant defended each decision as aggressive leadership. The board asked about the forged collateral statement for Arden Estate. He blamed a junior attorney. The attorney produced Grant's instruction: use the residence. Caroline signs whatever I put in front of her. Grant blamed Sienna for the consulting fee. Sienna produced his approval. Grant blamed the CFO for the loans. The CFO produced warnings Grant ignored. Every shield returned as evidence. The board voted. Grant was removed as CEO. He retained his personal shares but lost executive control. The result was 10-2. Caroline again abstained. Grant looked around the table. The chief operating officer closed the vote file. Grant left without collecting his presentation. Hale Urban appointed an interim CEO and announced an open search. Caroline declined the position. She had no interest in replacing Grant at the center of his old stage. She chaired the trust, approved governance changes, and returned daily operations to executives who had earned them. The first change opened an independent employee reporting office. The second required disclosure of executive relationships. The third banned personal homes from company collateral without verified ownership. The fourth recovered Sienna's false expenses. The diamond earrings returned through her attorney. Caroline sold them and used the money to reimburse assistants forced to pay for Sienna's personal errands. Arden Estate underwent a full inventory. The master bedroom became a guest suite. The study became Caroline's investment office. The room where Grant kept transfer papers became a records library. She did not burn the bed or smash the furniture. She changed who controlled the doors. Grant tried to rebuild. He formed Hale Strategic Partners and contacted former clients. He offered lower fees and claimed Caroline's trust had seized a family company through marital revenge. 3 clients agreed to meetings. Then they requested proof he owned the project data he presented. He did not. Hale Urban sent cease and desist notices limited to company materials. Grant could operate, but he could not take designs, contacts, or confidential bids. His first deal failed. His second investor withdrew after seeing the audit. His third partner was Sienna's uncle. They revived the contaminated portion of Crown Harbor under a new company. The environmental cost exceeded their budget within 1 month. Grant asked Hale Urban to buy the property. Caroline rejected the inflated offer. The city later purchased a portion for a public park at half the price. Grant's new company carried the remaining debt. No one had tricked him. He signed the deal with full information because he needed a public victory. Sienna launched a public interview. She called herself a young employee manipulated by a powerful CEO. She admitted the affair, but denied knowing Caroline owned the villa or controlled the trust. The interviewer asked about the robe. Sienna said Grant told her Caroline abandoned it. The interviewer asked about the share transfer conversation. Sienna called it flirtation. Then the program displayed her own messages. Make sure she signs before I move my clothes permanently. Once the villa is ours, I want the blue bedroom redesigned. Can you reduce her settlement if she fights? Sienna's victim story collapsed in 6 minutes. Former assistants posted expense receipts. Employees described her threats. The interview ended early. Her hotel contract disappeared the next morning. She returned to a smaller apartment and accepted a repayment settlement with Hale Urban. Caroline did not comment. Grant did not accept the board decision. During his suspension, he contacted minor shareholders and requested their proxy votes. He told them Caroline planned to sell Hale Urban to a foreign fund, remove the Hale name, and break the company into pieces. The claim frightened several longtime investors. Grant needed only 12% more voting support to challenge the Arden control trigger after the Crown Harbor breach was cured. He invited shareholders to a private dinner at the Hale Club. Caroline received no invitation. She did not need one. The club's largest mortgage belonged to the Arden Trust. She allowed the dinner to continue. Grant stood before 30 investors beneath a portrait of his grandfather. He described himself as the last defender of a family institution. He called Caroline a hidden financier who had entered marriage under false pretenses and waited for a chance to seize control. Then an investor asked why the Arden Trust had funded the company for 9 years. Grant said the trust had acted for profit. Another asked why he pledged Arden estate without checking ownership. Grant blamed an attorney. A third asked about Sienna's $4 million fee. Grant called it an industry payment. The questions continued. By dessert, his speech had become a defense. Caroline sent each shareholder the same secure packet at 8:30. The original capital agreement, the Crown Harbor valuation, the related party disclosure, the board vote taken without Caroline's participation. No insults, no bedroom video, only company records. 7 investors withdrew their proxies before leaving the club. Grant learned through notifications while still standing beneath his grandfather's portrait. Sienna created Blake Advisory Group 4 days after losing her position. The company had no office and 1 employee, but it immediately contacted 12 Hale Urban clients. Sienna offered access to Grant, discounted project fees, and confidential redevelopment plans. One client forwarded the proposal to the audit committee. The attached plan belonged to Hale Urban. It included unreleased cost estimates and private landowner names. The file history showed it had been copied from Sienna's executive laptop the night Caroline returned to Arden Estate. Sienna denied taking it. Then the estate inventory found a portable drive missing from the study. The drive's serial number appeared in the company access log. Caroline sent a preservation notice. Sienna responded on social media. She accused Caroline of using inherited money to crush a woman who had fallen in love with the wrong man. The post included a photograph of Sienna crying beside 2 suitcases. It did not include the stolen client proposal. Hale Urban filed a narrow claim demanding return of company data. It did not ask the court to stop Sienna from working or speaking. At the first hearing, Sienna's attorney argued that Grant gave her permission to use the files. Grant's written statement denied it. Sienna read his denial across the courtroom. Her face changed. He had promised to protect her. Under legal pressure, he protected himself. The judge ordered the drive returned and prohibited use of the copied plans. Blake Advisory lost its first clients. Sienna returned the drive with half the files deleted. The forensic report recovered the directory names. One folder was called CV Transfer. Another was called New Mrs. Hale. A third contained photographs of Arden estate rooms with renovation notes. Blue bedroom for future nursery. Caroline's study becomes Sienna's dressing room. Remove Arden portraits after closing. Sienna had planned the villa as if Caroline had already disappeared. The most important folder contained audio from Grant's private meetings. Sienna had recorded him for protection. In one file, Grant discussed using Caroline's monthly allowance to pressure her into signing the shares. In another, he told Sienna the Arden Trust was a weak family office with no appetite for conflict. In a third, he admitted hiding the environmental report because the Crown Harbor seller threatened to expose the affair. The audit committee received the business-related recordings under court supervision. Grant called them illegal. The court allowed only conversations involving company transactions in a state where one participant could consent to recording. Sienna became that participant. The deleted files she hoped to hide became the strongest evidence against Grant. Grant's supporters tried a different attack. They questioned Caroline's competence. Anonymous articles described her as a sheltered heiress who had never managed construction, employees, or public projects. One headline asked whether a betrayed wife should control thousands of jobs. Caroline did not publish a personal defense. She invited the press to Crown Harbor. The site tour began at 7 in the morning. Engineers explained the revised plan. The contaminated parcel had been separated. Affordable housing increased. The waterfront park doubled in size. Project debt fell. No workers lost positions. Caroline answered questions beside the project director rather than in front of him. A reporter asked whether her divorce influenced the decision. Another asked whether she intended to punish Grant. A third asked why she stayed hidden for years. The short answers left little room for scandal. The project director presented the budget. Caroline's corrected deal saved enough money to fund an entire housing block. The competence story died at the construction site. Grant asked Eleanor Hale to intervene with the Arden Trust. Eleanor traveled to London and requested a meeting with Caroline's father, Richard Arden. Grant expected her social standing to influence him. Richard received her in a plain conference room. He was not the theatrical billionaire Grant imagined. He wore a gray suit, carried no entourage into the room, and placed one folder on the table. The folder contained every capital advance made to Hale Urban since the recession. Eleanor recognized her late husband's signature. "He never told Grant," she said. Richard closed the folder. Eleanor asked him to restore Grant. Richard refused. "Caroline has not used my vote once. Your son lost the board by his own record." Eleanor looked at the capital schedule. The meeting ended in 12 minutes. Eleanor returned to New York without the rescue Grant expected. Grant's next move targeted the Arden credit facility. He sent the lender a notice claiming Caroline's trust had created a conflict of interest by controlling both debt and votes. If the lender suspended the facility, Hale Urban would struggle to pay contractors at Crown Harbor. The bank scheduled an emergency review. Grant arrived with outside counsel. Caroline arrived with the interim CEO and the independent audit chair. Grant argued that the Arden Trust manufactured the governance breach to gain control. Caroline presented the timeline. Grant pledged Arden estate before the trust knew. Grant approved Sienna's fee before the trust knew. Grant suppressed the environmental report before the trust knew. Each breach predated Caroline's return. The bank asked why the trust should remain both lender and voting controller. Caroline offered a solution. The facility would move to an independent consortium at the same rate. The Arden Trust would guarantee transition costs but give up direct lender influence. Grant had expected her to defend the power. She reduced it. The bank approved the transfer. Contractor payments continued. Grant's conflict argument disappeared. The Arden voting rights remained because they came from preferred shares, not the loan. His attack removed the only financial leverage he might have blamed on Caroline. The lender review uncovered a letter of authorization bearing Caroline's signature. It allowed Grant to use Arden estate as company collateral. Caroline had never signed it. The signature was close enough to pass a quick review, but the date used an American format Caroline never used on trust documents. The witness line named Grant's personal assistant. The assistant admitted she scanned Caroline's signature from a holiday card. Grant denied ordering it. Sienna produced a message. "Get the residence letter finished before Caroline returns. She signs too slowly." Grant had sent it to the assistant. Forgery changed the review. The board referred the document to authorities and froze Grant's remaining executive benefits. His company car returned. His private office lease ended. His legal fees stopped coming from Hale Urban. For the first time, he had to finance his own defense. Grant called Caroline at midnight. She sat in the Arden estate study reviewing fellowship proposals. Grant breathed hard. He changed direction. He went silent. Grant wanted Caroline to become the enemy large enough to explain his fall. Her refusal left him alone with his own decisions. Hale Urban's annual investor meeting remained scheduled at the Arden Crown Hotel. Grant demanded the event be moved. The board kept it. He feared entering another Arden property after Arden Estate. The ballroom held shareholders, employees, lenders, city officials, and clients. The main screen displayed the company's recovery plan. Caroline entered without her father. Grant arrived under a temporary shareholder pass. Sienna appeared outside with reporters, but no invitation. She announced that Caroline silenced her to hide family corruption. The hotel screens in the lobby played the court order requiring Sienna to return stolen data. Reporters asked about the drive. Sienna left before the meeting began. Inside, Grant challenged the interim CEO from the floor. The screen showed quarterly numbers. Revenue had fallen during the scandal, then recovered after Crown Harbor closed. Cash reserves increased, contractor delays decreased, employee departures slowed. The interim CEO asked which result required Grant's return. He pointed toward the Hale name. Caroline took the microphone. The employees' shareholder group stood. They held 8% of voting shares. Their representative announced they would oppose Grant's restoration. Grant's proxy challenge ended in the ballroom. After the investor meeting, Sienna entered the hotel lounge and waited for Grant. She had one final bargaining tool: the full bedroom video from Arden Estate. Caroline recorded only the discovery. Sienna had activated a room camera weeks earlier because she feared Grant would deny the affair. Her footage included his plans to obtain Caroline's shares, hide the Crown Harbor fee, and move Sienna into the villa. Sienna offered the video to Grant for $1 million. Grant refused. She offered it to a tabloid. The tabloid's lawyers contacted Caroline for comment. Caroline reviewed the footage and requested only that explicit images remain private. She did not block the business-related audio. The article published the next morning. The headline focused on Grant's plan to strip his wife of voting rights while using her family property. Public opinion changed from divorce gossip to governance fraud. Grant accused Caroline of releasing intimate material. The tabloid confirmed Sienna was the source. He sued Sienna. She countersued for unpaid promises and retaliation. Their private alliance became a public legal fight. Caroline remained outside it. The shareholder group requested a permanent governance vote. The proposal would remove enhanced control from the Arden Trust after 5 years of clean audits, distribute more voting rights to employees, and limit any family shareholder from appointing a majority of directors. Grant expected Caroline to oppose it. She supported it. The Arden Trust would keep its economic ownership but surrender emergency control once the company proved stable. At the meeting, Grant called the proposal a trick. The employee representative answered with the original capital agreement. The power had been purchased during the recession and activated by Grant's breaches. Nothing was stolen. The proposal passed. Employees gained 2 board seats immediately. Grant lost the argument that Caroline intended permanent family domination. The forgery case reached a civil hearing. Grant's assistant testified that he ordered her to create the Arden Estate authorization. She produced the original voice note. Use Caroline's signature from the holiday letter. She won't care once Crown Harbor closes. The recording played once. Grant's attorney did not cross-examine for long. The court voided every agreement connected to the forged authorization and ordered Grant personally responsible for lender costs. The amount was substantial, but not ruinous. Caroline requested no punitive award for herself. The judge asked why. The award went to Hale Urban. Grant could not tell the press Caroline had used court to enrich herself. Sienna's repayment settlement required an inventory of every item removed from Arden Estate. Most objects returned. 2 paintings, the diamond earrings, silver serving pieces, 3 designer bags bought on the company account. 1 item remained missing: Caroline's mother's sapphire brooch. Sienna claimed Grant gave it to her. Grant claimed he never touched it. Photographs from a private dinner showed Eleanor Hale wearing the brooch 1 month after Caroline's wedding. Eleanor said she believed it was a gift from her son. The brooch had moved from Caroline's dressing room to Grant, then to Eleanor, then to Sienna for the Arden Estate dinner. 3 people treated one woman's property as a family supply. Eleanor returned it personally. She placed the box on Caroline's desk. The conversation ended there. Caroline restored the brooch and wore it to the next hospital board meeting. Not as a victory over Sienna, as something returned to its correct history. Grant's personal finances began to tighten. He still owned shares, but the board suspended dividends until the expense and forgery claims were resolved. His new development company carried Crown Harbor debt. Legal costs increased. He sold the Manhattan apartment. Sienna filed a claim for belongings left inside. Eleanor refused to let him move into her townhouse. "You brought this to every door," she told him. Grant rented a smaller apartment and continued searching for investors. He approached Richard Arden directly through a formal proposal. The project was a legitimate warehouse redevelopment. The numbers were reasonable. Grant expected rejection because of personal history. Richard's team reviewed it like any other proposal. They declined because projected rent did not support the debt. Grant asked whether Caroline influenced the answer. The analyst showed him the figures. No revenge, only a bad deal. The ordinary rejection hurt more than a dramatic one. The final Hale Urban shareholder vote took place 6 months after Caroline returned from Geneva. The board nominated the chief operating officer, Elena Park, as permanent CEO. Grant nominated himself. He presented his growth record. Elena presented the recovery record. Crown Harbor closed, improper expenses recovered, employee retention restored, debt refinanced, client data secured. Grant asked shareholders to choose legacy. Elena asked them to choose results. The vote appeared on the screen. Elena received 79%. Grant received 11. The remaining votes abstained. Caroline's enhanced block was not counted because she had voluntarily suspended it for the election. Grant lost under ordinary voting rights. He removed his name card and left. No one stopped him. The divorce settlement became final after all company claims were separated from the marriage. Grant kept the property and accounts titled in his name, reduced by his personal liabilities. Caroline retained Arden estate, trust assets, and her shares. Neither received property from the other. The agreement Grant once celebrated remained exactly as written. He had demanded that Caroline walk away with nothing of his. He had never understood how little of her life belonged to him. The court stamped the decree. Caroline removed the Hale surname from her legal records. Her company biography read Caroline Arden. Nothing more was needed. The independent audit continued after Grant lost the election. Most problems were already known. Then auditors found a group of construction invoices from 3 years earlier. The vendors had different names but shared one mailing address. Each payment fell just below the threshold requiring board approval. The address belonged to a mailbox rented by Sienna. The total reached $12 million. Grant said the vendors performed consulting work. Project managers had never heard of them. Sienna said she processed invoices under Grant's instructions. The audit team followed the money. Some paid for legitimate subcontractors, some covered executive travel and private renovations. $2 million moved into a reserve account controlled by Grant. The account funded his new development company after suspension. Grant had used Hale Urban money to prepare a competitor. The board referred the findings to regulators. Grant's new company accounts were frozen pending review. Grant blamed Sienna publicly. He released a statement calling her a dishonest employee who exploited his trust and falsified invoices. He said their personal relationship impaired his judgment but did not make him responsible for her theft. Sienna read the statement from a hotel room. Then she opened the archive she had kept since the affair began. She sent the audit team every approval message. Grant selected vendor names. Grant divided the invoice amounts. Grant instructed her to use Crown Harbor budgets. Grant transferred the reserve money. Sienna had participated, but she had not designed the system. Her cooperation did not erase her liability. It prevented Grant from placing all of it on her. Regulators interviewed both. Grant arrived with 3 attorneys. Sienna arrived with 1 and a stack of printed messages. The investigation widened. Hale Urban disclosed the audit to shareholders before rumors could shape it. Elena Park held a public call. She explained that suspicious payments were isolated, contractor wages remained protected, and the company had created a reserve for any repayment. Caroline spoke for less than 2 minutes. The individuals responsible will answer. Employees and current projects will not carry their private conduct. The share price fell for 1 day. Then it stabilized. Grant had expected scandal to force the board to restore him as the only person capable of calming investors. The opposite happened. Transparent disclosure removed his leverage. Sienna requested protection for one final piece of evidence. She had a recording from the night Caroline returned. After Caroline left Arden Estate, Grant called the CFO and ordered him to accelerate the share transfer filing. He planned to submit it once Caroline signed the divorce papers, using the separation waiver as proof she intended to surrender company interests. The CFO refused. Grant threatened to fire him. The CFO saved his own copy of the call. Together, the recordings showed an attempted misuse of the divorce agreement. Grant had not simply discussed taking Caroline's shares in bed. He tried to create a filing path that same night. The trust attorney had blocked it before submission. The regulator added attempted securities fraud to the review. Grant appeared at a legislative hearing on corporate governance. The hearing was not criminal court. It examined how family-controlled companies used preferred shares, private lenders, and executive relationships. Grant tried to present himself as a founder, displaced by hidden capital. Caroline appeared after him. She brought the original agreement signed by Grant's father. The terms were simple. The Arden Trust provided rescue capital. Hale leadership remained in place. Emergency voting control activated only after serious breaches. The committee asked whether Caroline had planned to activate it through marriage. He knew the trust existed. He did not ask who chaired it. The answer ended the attempt to portray the marriage as a trap. Eleanor Hale watched the hearing from her townhouse. Grant's testimony blamed his father for hiding the Arden agreement and his mother for encouraging him to protect the family name at any cost. Eleanor turned off the television. The next morning, she delivered family records to the audit committee. They showed that Grant's father had warned him about executive expenses before his death. Grant had received a letter explaining that leadership depended on maintaining the trust's governance standards. Grant claimed he never saw it. Eleanor had signed the delivery receipt. She admitted placing the letter in his desk herself. Grant had read it. He simply believed the emergency rights would never be used. Grant called his mother. Grant said nothing. Eleanor continued. Caroline did not take the company from you. You treated every warning as weakness. She ended the call. It was the first time she publicly chose truth over the Hale image. The audit found no evidence that Caroline had benefited personally from the emergency control. Her trust received the same dividend rate as before. She took no executive salary. She purchased no company assets. She approved the employee voting plan that would eventually reduce her own control. Grant's claim of marital revenge lost its final support. Regulators closed the inquiry into the Arden Trust. The inquiry into Grant remained open. Grant attempted to settle. He offered to return the reserve account, surrender half his shares, and accept a 5-year ban from executive management if regulators dropped the fraud referral. Hale Urban could not control the regulators' decision. The board accepted repayment but made no promise about charges. Grant transferred the remaining reserve. The company used it to pay subcontractors whose invoices had been delayed during the audit. The money returned to the projects it came from. Sienna's settlement required her to repay personal expenses, surrender profits from Blake Advisory, and accept a permanent ban from holding financial authority at Hale Urban. She kept the right to work elsewhere. Caroline did not seek a wider ban. At the settlement conference, Sienna asked for 1 private minute. Caroline agreed with the door open and attorneys nearby. I thought if Grant gave me your house, your jewelry, and your position, it meant I had won. Caroline waited. Sienna looked down. The honest word did not repair anything, but it stopped another excuse. The robe is being cleaned, Sienna said. That had already happened. The meeting ended. Grant's criminal case focused on the forged authorization and reserve transfers. He pleaded not guilty. At trial, the assistant played the voice note, ordering Caroline's signature copied. The CFO described refusing the post-divorce filing. Sienna identified the invoice system. Grant's attorney argued that aggressive business shortcuts had been misread as fraud. The prosecutor placed the Arden estate deed, false authorization, share transfer draft, and reserve payments in order. The pattern was clear. Grant treated property, signatures, and funds as available whenever the true owner was unlikely to object quickly. The jury convicted him on the forgery-related charge and misuse of company funds. Other counts remained civil matters. He received restitution, a management ban, and a custodial sentence short enough to reflect that the company recovered most funds, but long enough to end the fiction that this was only a bad marriage. Caroline did not attend sentencing. She was at Crown Harbor opening the first residential building. Families entered apartments. Construction workers received completion bonuses. The city opened the waterfront path. Elena Park cut the ribbon with the project director. Caroline stood beside the employees. When a reporter asked about Grant's sentence, she said, "The question did not return." Grant served his sentence away from cameras. He was not reduced to a cartoon punishment. He kept personal savings protected by law, read project reports, and completed financial ethics courses required under his agreement. His letters to Caroline came through attorneys. The first asked for forgiveness. The second blamed Sienna. The third asked whether the company still used his designs. Caroline answered none. Elena's team reviewed every design and paid lawful royalties where required. Grant received what belonged to him. Nothing more. Sienna returned the silk robe in a cedar box. She included no dramatic note. Only one sentence. I had no right to wear this. Caroline opened the box at Arden Estate. The robe had been cleaned, but a small tear remained near the shoulder. Her mother's blue embroidery survived. Caroline did not throw it away. She asked a textile restorer to repair the tear with visible gold thread. The repair did not pretend the damage never happened. It made the boundary of the damage clear. The Hale Urban Board reviewed the company name. Some directors wanted to remove Hale entirely. Longtime employees opposed erasing the founder's history because Grant's failures did not cancel the work of earlier generations. Caroline proposed a compromise. Hale Arden Urban Group. The name recognized both histories and prevented either family from claiming sole ownership. The employee shareholder group approved. The new sign rose above the Manhattan office 6 months later. Grant saw a photograph through his attorney. He objected to the Arden name. His remaining shares gave him the right to object. They did not give him enough votes to stop it. The first annual report under the new name listed every major shareholder, loan, related party contract, and executive relationship. No hidden family office, no secret secretary arrangement, no personal residence described as corporate property. The report became longer. It also became easier to trust. Investors approved it with 96% support. Caroline returned to Geneva for another negotiation. This time, her biography identified her clearly as chair of the Arden Trust and a director of Hale Arden Urban Group. She did not hide. After the agreement closed, she flew home one day early. The memory of her last early return followed her from the airport to Connecticut. At Arden Estate, the gate opened. Fellowship residents were holding a project workshop in the library. No locked bedroom waited upstairs. No man had assumed the house would remain available because Caroline was away. She placed her suitcase near the stairs and joined the meeting. One fellow was preparing to leave a business partnership after discovering that her co-founder had used her name on a loan. She asked Caroline whether walking away meant losing. Caroline looked at the documents. Walking away from the person and walking away from your rights are different decisions. They found an attorney and preserved the fellow's ownership before she resigned. Caroline did not advise her to surrender everything for a dramatic exit. She had learned that a clean break required accurate boundaries, not self-erasure. The fellowship created a legal and financial clinic inside Arden Estate. Participants learned how to read deeds, shareholder agreements, guarantees, expense reports, and employment contracts. The lessons were practical. Whose name is on the property? Who can move the money? What happens after separation? Where is consent recorded? The study where Grant once kept transfer papers became the clinic classroom. His failed plan taught other women how not to sign blindly. Eleanor visited the fellowship opening. She had not entered Arden Estate since returning the sapphire brooch. The house no longer resembled the private stage Grant and Sienna created. Desks filled the blue room. Whiteboards covered the study walls. Women moved between sessions carrying folders. Eleanor stopped beneath a Arden family portrait. Caroline looked toward the classroom. Eleanor donated a collection of Hale Company archives to the program. The records showed earlier women in the Hale family who had managed finances, while men held public titles. Their names entered the company history for the first time. After Grant's release, he requested one meeting with the Hale Arden board. His management ban remained active, but he still owned non-controlling shares and could address annual meetings. He entered the ballroom through the shareholder line. No private elevator, no executive escort. Grant asked whether the board would buy his shares. The independent valuation arrived on the screen. The company offered the same price available to every shareholder. Grant had expected either punishment or a premium for the family name. He received neither. He accepted. The employee ownership plan purchased half. The Arden Trust purchased none. The remaining shares went to market. Grant's financial connection to the company ended through an ordinary transaction. Outside the meeting, Grant saw Caroline near the hotel entrance. They had not spoken in more than 2 years. He carried no box and made no public scene. "I sold the shares," he said. Caroline did not ask why. Grant looked toward the waiting cars. Grant lowered his eyes. He waited as if the admission might open a door. It did not. They walked in opposite directions. Caroline returned to Arden Estate that evening. The repaired robe hung inside the cedar wardrobe. Gold thread marked the tear near the shoulder. She wore it while making tea in the kitchen. The fabric felt familiar again, not untouched, restored. In the library, fellowship residents practiced presentations for investors. One woman stood at the front explaining a housing proposal. Others challenged her costs and assumptions. Caroline listened from the doorway. The villa once held a man telling his mistress that Caroline would never survive without him. Now it held women learning exactly how to survive without anyone's permission. Hale Arden's 5-year clean audit period ended. Under the governance charter, the Arden Trust's enhanced voting control expired automatically. Employee shares increased. Independent directors gained the majority. Caroline signed the release. She could have amended the rules and kept control. She did not. The power had completed its purpose. At the next annual meeting, no single person controlled the company. Not Grant, not Caroline, not either family. The structure became stronger than the names. On the 6th anniversary of the night she returned early, Caroline landed at JFK after midnight. She carried one suitcase. A car drove her to Connecticut. The roads were quiet. At Arden Estate, the gate recognized her fingerprint. Lights remained on in the study because a fellow was finishing a funding application. Caroline entered through the front door. The woman looked up. Caroline smiled. No fear entered the room. No lie waited upstairs. An early return was simply an early return. Caroline placed her suitcase beside the stairs and walked into the study. The house was hers. The life was hers. The future did not need anyone else's permission. Sienna made one final attempt to rewrite the story. She launched a podcast episode titled The Wife Who Hid Everything. She described Caroline as a billionaire investor who pretended to be ordinary, entered marriage under false circumstances, and used an affair as an excuse to capture a company. The episode avoided the villa deed, forged authorization, copied client files, and consulting fee. It focused on Caroline's hidden identity. For one day, the story gained attention. Commentators asked whether Grant had been tested unfairly. Caroline released no personal video. The Arden Trust published a dated disclosure form from before the marriage. Grant had signed acknowledgement that Caroline held separate trust interests and private investments. The form did not reveal amounts because it did not need to. He knew she had independent assets. He simply assumed they were small. The trust also published Grant's own statement from the marriage agreement. Neither party relies on the other's representation of social status or future inheritance. Sienna removed the episode. The platform kept the correction. Former Arden estate staff submitted expense records from Grant's private dinners. He had charged Hale Urban for wine, catering, security, and transportation while describing the events as client meetings. Some clients attended. Others did not exist. Sienna had used several dinners for birthday parties and fashion photographs. The total reached $300,000. Grant's earlier restitution agreement covered company misuse, but the villa staff had never received overtime for the late events. Caroline reviewed their timesheets. The estate trust paid the workers immediately and added the amount to Grant and Sienna's repayment claim. Every staff member received full overtime plus interest. The housekeeper who found Sienna's first suitcase had resigned after Grant accused her of gossip. Caroline invited her back as estate operations manager. She accepted. The first rule she posted in the staff office was simple: no resident may punish staff for reporting unauthorized guests. One of Grant's private dinners had hosted a city planning official before Crown Harbor approval. The official received a luxury watch purchased through Sienna's consulting account. Grant denied knowing about the gift. Sienna produced the seating plan and a message asking her to keep the official happy. The official resigned and returned the watch. The city reopened the original approval. Because Caroline's revised Crown Harbor plan had already removed the contaminated parcel and reduced density, the project met every current rule. No permit was canceled. Grant's improper dinner failed to damage the corrected project. The returned watch sold at auction. Proceeds funded the waterfront public playground. The playground opened beside Crown Harbor in spring. Children ran across climbing frames shaped like bridges and towers. Parents sat beneath young trees. Construction workers brought their families. Caroline attended without a speaking role. The city planner who replaced the resigned official thanked the project team, not the investors. A small plaque near the entrance listed public funding sources and the recovered ethics settlement. No person received naming rights. The place existed because improper money had been redirected into public use. The Arden Estate Clinic received its first urgent case. A fellow named Rachel discovered that her husband had placed their home into a new company and listed himself as sole owner. He told her the transfer was routine tax planning and asked her to sign a consent page without reading it. Rachel brought the papers to the clinic. The consent waived her occupancy rights. Caroline's attorney preserved the original deed and stopped the filing. Rachel did not need to become secretly wealthy or destroy a corporation. She needed someone to read the document before her signature became a weapon. The case changed the fellowship curriculum. Every participant completed a property and guarantee review. The clinic discovered 3 more hidden guarantees among participants. One woman had guaranteed her partner's business debt. Another had signed away intellectual property. A third believed she co-owned a restaurant that existed only in her partner's company name. Attorneys corrected what could be corrected and documented what could not. Caroline watched the sessions from the back. Her own share transfer papers remained sealed in the program archive as a teaching example, with private names removed. The page Grant expected her to sign now taught others where to stop reading and ask questions. Richard Arden began reducing his daily role at the family trust. He did not announce retirement. He simply moved more decisions to Caroline's committee and spent longer periods with her mother. At the first annual meeting Caroline led alone, several senior investors expected Richard to enter at the last moment. He did not. Caroline presented infrastructure returns, hospital budgets, housing investments, and risk controls. She answered every question. The committee approved the plan. Afterward, Richard called. He laughed. Caroline had once hidden her work to protect a marriage. Now no one introduced her through a husband or father. Grant published a short business memoir after his management ban ended. The book described ambition, collapse, and rebuilding. He admitted the affair and poor controls, but claimed the Arden takeover destroyed a company that could have recovered. Hale Arden released no attack. The company's audited numbers appeared in the annual report. Revenue higher than before. Debt lower. Employee ownership larger. Crown Harbor completed. The company had recovered. It simply recovered without Grant. His memoir sold modestly. Reviewers praised the early business chapters and questioned his refusal to accept the record. Caroline did not read it. Sienna wrote no memoir. She completed her repayment plan and began working for a small event supplier. Her role carried no spending authority. She performed well enough to remain employed. One day, the supplier applied to provide furniture for an Arden Estate Fellowship dinner. The procurement system flagged Sienna's name. Caroline did not reject the bid automatically. Independent reviewers compared price, quality, and references. The supplier ranked second. Another company won. Sienna received the same fair process as everyone else. No revenge, no favor. Only the rules she once believed could be bent. Eleanor Hale asked Caroline to join a small family history committee. The Hale archives praised male founders while women appeared mainly in wedding photographs. Financial journals showed that Grant's grandmother negotiated loans during 2 recessions, his aunt managed construction payroll, his mother preserved investor relationships after his father's illness. Their work had been hidden behind the Hale name. Caroline agreed to help correct the archive. The new company museum opened with documents rather than portraits alone. One display showed the Arden Rescue Capital. Another showed employee pension investments. A third explained the governance failure under Grant. The history became less flattering. It also became true. At the museum opening, a reporter asked Eleanor whether Caroline had ruined the Hale legacy. Eleanor looked toward the display about her mother-in-law's recession loan. Grant heard the quote later. He did not respond. The estate manager found one unopened box in the Arden estate attic. It had been shipped by Grant during the divorce and mislabeled as kitchen equipment. Inside were Caroline's unopened holiday gifts from 3 years of marriage. Perfume selected by Sienna. Scarves in colors Caroline never wore. A bracelet engraved with the wrong anniversary date. Grant had paid for gifts but outsourced knowing his wife. Caroline donated the unused items to a hospital fundraiser. The incorrect bracelet sold for more than expected because the auctioneer described it only as unsigned jewelry. No one needed the story. The fellowship program expanded from 6 residents to 24. Arden Estate could not hold everyone, so the Arden Trust renovated a second property near the city. Caroline refused to call it a shelter. It was a residence, office, and training center. Participants paid on a sliding scale. The program published its budget. No donor could demand personal stories from residents. No participant needed to perform pain for housing. The rule came from Caroline's own experience with public fascination after the divorce. At the new residence opening, Caroline met a young accountant who had once worked at Hale Urban. The accountant remembered Grant's staff meeting after the divorce. She remembered believing Caroline was only an angry wife. "I was wrong," she said. The accountant joined the fellowship finance team and helped participants read business records. Hale Arden's employee ownership plan reached 20%. At the annual vote, employees selected a construction supervisor and a finance analyst for board seats. Neither came from an executive family. Caroline attended as an ordinary shareholder after enhanced rights expired. Her vote counted at the same rate as the trust's economic stake. The supervisor challenged one of her proposed investments. The board rejected it. Caroline accepted the result. Good governance had to remain good when it limited her too. Richard Arden visited Arden Estate during a fellowship dinner. He stood in the study where Grant's transfer papers had been found. Women filled the room with project boards, budgets, and legal notes. "You could have turned this place into a museum of revenge," he said. He handed Caroline a key. It opened the original Arden archive in London. She placed the key beside her own. No dramatic ceremony followed. The dinner bell rang. They joined the table. The Arden archive contained the first loan Richard made to Hale Urban. Grant's father had written a private note. "If my son ever believes the company survives because of his name alone, show him this page." Richard had never shown it. Caroline read it twice. She sent a copy to the company museum and to Grant through his attorney. Grant replied with one sentence. "I wish he had told me." Caroline did not answer. His father had left warnings. Grant had ignored the living people who repeated them. Grant later built a smaller project management firm. This time, he used his own capital, disclosed every partner, and maintained an independent accountant. The firm completed modest warehouse repairs and local commercial projects. It did not become an empire. It remained solvent. Caroline heard about it through annual conflict checks. The firm never bid on Hale Arden work. That distance was appropriate. His life continuing did not reduce her victory. Her victory had never required his permanent destruction. Sienna returned the final payment 1 month early. Her attorney sent confirmation to Hale Arden and Arden Estate staff. The company closed its claim. The estate closed its claim. Caroline signed the release. Sienna no longer owed her money. She still owned her history. Those were different things. Caroline's mother visited Arden Estate and opened the cedar wardrobe. She saw the gold repair along the robe's shoulder. Her mother touched the thread. They folded the robe together. The fabric returned to the drawer. At midnight, Caroline walked through the villa after the fellowship's annual dinner. Glasses waited in the kitchen. Presentation boards covered the study. Suitcases stood beside guest room doors. The house was full, but no one inside it was hidden. Every resident had a written agreement. Every room had a named purpose. Every person knew who owned what and how long she could stay. Clarity did not make the house cold. It made safety possible. Caroline entered the former master bedroom. It was now the main library. Shelves covered the wall where Grant and Sienna's photograph once stood. A long table occupied the place of the bed. On one shelf rested a plain binder, Property, Equity, and Consent. Inside was the fellowship guide. Caroline added one final page. Silence is not consent. Trust is not a transfer. Love is not ownership. Then she returned the binder to the shelf. The next morning, a resident found Caroline asleep in an armchair with a project report on her lap. She left a cup of coffee beside her. Caroline woke to sunlight across the library floor. For a second, she remembered the old bedroom. Then someone began typing at the long table. Another resident entered carrying legal books. The present replaced the memory. At breakfast, the women discussed a new housing fund. Caroline listened. The proposal would help people leaving controlling relationships secure temporary deposits without surrendering future income. Repayment terms were clear. No stories were required for approval. Independent trustees reviewed every case. The group voted to pilot it. Arden Estate provided the first capital. The villa Grant tried to use as collateral now helped other people keep control of their own homes. The pilot funded 10 deposits in its first year. 9 borrowers repaid on schedule. 1 needed an extension after losing work. The trustees approved it without public shame. The program expanded. No building carried Caroline's name. The results were enough. On the 10th anniversary of Richard's first investment in Hale Urban, the company held a history forum. Grant was invited as a former CEO. Caroline was invited as trust chair. Both attended. They sat on opposite sides of the stage. The moderator asked what saved the company during its hardest period. Grant answered first. Capital gave it time. Employees gave it value. Controls gave it a future. It was the first public answer from him that did not center his name. Caroline answered next. No argument followed. Afterward, Grant nodded once and left. Caroline returned to Arden Estate from the forum. The gate opened. Inside, a new resident waited in the foyer with a suitcase and frightened eyes. The estate manager handed her a room agreement, program schedule, and key. No one asked her to explain everything that night. Caroline carried one side of the suitcase upstairs. The woman apologized for its weight. They placed it inside the blue room. The door closed softly. Years earlier, Grant had told Sienna that Caroline would not last a day without him. He was wrong about the woman. He was also wrong about survival. Survival was not a billionaire father, a controlling share block, or a villa deed. Those gave Caroline tools. The choice to use them without becoming cruel was hers. She preserved jobs. She finished the project. She returned property. She reduced her own control when the crisis ended. She turned a private house into a place where other women learned not to sign away their names. That was the life Grant failed to imagine because he never looked beyond what he thought Caroline lacked. Late one evening, Caroline stood on the Arden Estate balcony. The garden lights glowed along the drive. Beyond the trees, the gate remained closed to the road and open to authorized residents. No reporters waited. No ex-husband knelt outside. No new romance arrived to prove her worth. Inside, women argued over a housing budget and laughed when the numbers refused to balance. Caroline went back to help. Her future did not begin when Grant lost everything. It began when she stopped letting his opinion define what she had. At 2 a.m, the same hour she had once discovered the affair, Caroline finished reviewing the housing proposal. She closed the laptop. The villa was quiet. The blue room door remained closed. The library lights switched off automatically. Caroline walked upstairs wearing the restored silk robe. Gold thread caught the hallway light. She entered her own room, closed the door, and slept. Nothing in the house belonged to a secret. Nothing in her life waited for permission. Grant came to Arden Estate one final time during winter. He requested 20 minutes to collect a box of family photographs found in storage. Caroline approved the visit. He entered through the main doors wearing an older coat. The sharp confidence remained in fragments, but exhaustion had reached his face. The villa looked different. Sienna's photographs were gone. Company plaques were gone. The study doors stood open. Grant collected the box. Near the staircase, he stopped. Caroline looked at him. The answer surprised him. Then why did you destroy everything? He looked toward the master bedroom. He had no answer. Sienna meant nothing, he said. Grant lifted the box. Grant lowered his eyes. Caroline opened the front door. He left carrying the photographs. The gate closed once. This time, he did not return. 1 year after the divorce, Arden Estate reopened under a new purpose. Caroline converted the guest wing into a residence for women completing financial and leadership fellowships. The program supported professionals returning to work after caregiving, illness, or abusive relationships. No public gala announced it. The first 6 residents arrived with suitcases and laptops. One woman paused in the foyer and asked whether the house had always belonged to Caroline. Why did you let someone else act like it was his? Caroline looked toward the staircase. The answer was brief. The women moved into their rooms. The blue bedroom Sienna wanted to redesign became a shared study. The master bedroom became a library and meeting space. Caroline's mother's silk robe returned from professional cleaning. The fabric could not be restored completely. A faint mark remained near the cuff. Caroline folded it and placed it in a cedar drawer. It no longer represented Sienna. It belonged to the woman who gave it and the daughter who recovered it. Hale Urban completed Crown Harbor under new leadership. The clean parcels became offices, housing, and a public waterfront. The contaminated section entered a city restoration program. The revised project finished under budget. Employees received bonuses. Grant's name did not appear on the opening plaque. Caroline attended the ribbon cutting beside the project team. She remained near the back while engineers, planners, and construction workers took the stage. Reporters asked whether the project proved she had defeated her ex-husband. It proves the project never needed a private fee, she said. Then she returned to work. Grant's new company filed for bankruptcy after the Crown Harbor debt came due. He kept a modest apartment and accepted a position managing projects for another developer. He no longer entered rooms as the owner. He reported to a regional director he had once refused to promote. Sienna left New York after completing her repayment plan. Rumors said she worked in event sales in another state. Caroline never checked. Eleanor Hale moved into a smaller townhouse and stopped giving interviews about the family legacy. The Hale name remained on the company because employees voted to keep its history while adding Arden to the legal name. Hale Arden Urban Group, not as a marriage symbol, as an accurate record of capital and work. At the second anniversary of Caroline's return from Geneva, she arrived at Arden Estate just after midnight. The gate opened to her fingerprint. Lights glowed in the fellowship study. 2 residents were preparing a presentation at the long table. Another slept on the sofa beneath a blanket. Caroline carried her suitcase upstairs. The hallway was quiet. No secret voices came from the bedroom. No unfamiliar clothes covered the floor. No transfer documents waited beside champagne. She opened the cedar drawer and saw the folded robe. Then she closed it. The night Grant moved his mistress into Caroline's private villa had not revealed that Caroline was secretly wealthy. It revealed something more important. Wealth meant little if she kept allowing other people to define her place inside her own life. The house had always been hers. The shares had always been hers. The voice had always been hers. She simply stopped lending them to a man who called her silence weakness. Caroline went downstairs, placed her suitcase beside the door, and joined the women working in the study. The villa was no longer a backdrop for betrayal. It was full of women building futures under their own names. The fellowship's housing expansion triggered one final challenge to Arden Estate. A former attorney from Grant's divorce team filed a property notice claiming the settlement transferred all marital residences to Grant. The notice described Arden Estate as the primary marital home and argued that Caroline had waived it with the Manhattan apartment and vehicles. The filing temporarily blocked a renovation loan for the second residence. Grant denied authorizing it. The attorney claimed he was protecting an overlooked client right. Caroline opened the original settlement. The document listed marital assets by schedule. Arden Estate did not appear. The trust deed predated the marriage. Grant's own attorney had stated during signing that the villa was excluded. The conference room recording preserved the exchange. Caroline submitted the deed, schedule, and recording. The notice was removed within 48 hours. The attorney faced sanctions for filing a claim without current client authority. The renovation loan continued. The false property notice created a public hearing because neighbors objected to expanding the fellowship. Some feared traffic. Others believed a residence for women leaving controlling relationships would reduce property values. Caroline attended the planning meeting with the estate manager and program residents. She did not present a story about her divorce. The architect showed parking plans. The operations team showed security. The finance director showed a fully funded budget. Residents described professional training, quiet study hours, and background requirements. The proposal met every zoning rule. The board approved it. One neighbor continued protesting outside. 3 months after opening, that neighbor applied to hire a graduate from the fellowship as a finance manager. The graduate accepted after negotiating a fair salary. The second residence opened with 20 rooms and no master suite. Every room had the same lock, desk, and window size. Staff offices remained on the ground floor. Legal and financial clinics occupied the former dining room. Caroline placed no portrait in the entrance. The wall displayed a map showing every housing deposit the program funded. Dots appeared across 5 states. Each dot represented a person with a lease or deed in her own name. Grant's former divorce attorney sent Caroline a written apology. He admitted assuming she surrendered Arden Estate because Grant repeatedly called it his estate. He had warned Grant that the deed contradicted the claim, but never corrected the language outside the settlement room. Caroline accepted the factual correction. She did not absolve his filing colleague. Professional responsibility belonged to each person. The original settlement training became part of the State Bar's property seminar. Attorneys studied how informal labels like our house could conflict with legal ownership. Hale Arden completed its first decade after the Arden Rescue investment. The annual report contained a governance timeline, recession capital, preferred voting rights, Crown Harbor breach, emergency control, employee ownership, control expiration. No step was hidden. The report won an industry award for transparency. Caroline declined to accept it alone. Elena Park, the employee board representatives, the audit chair, and the CFO joined her on stage. The award remained in the company lobby. not at Arden Estate. Richard Arden formally retired the following year. He transferred trust leadership through a scheduled board process, not a family announcement. Caroline was elected chair by independent trustees. Another director became chief investment officer. Richard retained one ordinary board seat. At the first meeting, he disagreed with Caroline's hotel acquisition proposal and voted against it. The proposal failed by one vote. At dinner, Caroline asked whether he enjoyed it. They laughed. The trust no longer depended on one father defending one daughter. It had become an institution capable of telling both of them no. The final Arden Estate evidence box remained in the trust archive. It contained the champagne receipt, share transfer drafts, estate inventory, and copies of the lock screen messages. Caroline reviewed it once before authorizing closure. The original robe did not belong there. The sapphire brooch did not belong there. The house key did not belong there. Those had returned to life rather than evidence. She signed the archive date. The box moved to sealed storage with a destruction schedule after all legal retention periods ended. Even evidence did not need to occupy space forever. On the final night before the archive closed, Caroline walked through Arden Estate. The library held a property workshop. The blue room held a resident preparing for an interview. The kitchen held 3 women arguing over burnt soup. The estate manager passed with a maintenance list. Nothing in the villa resembled the still bedroom Caroline had recorded years earlier. That scene had been loud in memory because it once appeared to explain everything. It no longer did. Grant's betrayal explained his character. It did not explain Caroline's future. At midnight, the soup was finally edible. The residents gathered around the kitchen table. Caroline joined them in the repaired robe, its gold seam visible beneath the light. No one asked why the robe had been repaired. They discussed interviews, leases, investors, and a broken printer. The ordinary conversation carried more life than every public downfall that came before it. Caroline looked toward the dark windows. Years earlier, she left the villa believing she had lost a marriage. She had actually recovered the right to decide what happened inside every room that belonged to her. The next morning, the gate opened for a delivery van carrying desks for the second residence. The driver presented the correct order. Staff confirmed the number. The doors opened. Clear permission. Accurate records. No borrowed name. No secret promise. Caroline watched from the study window as the desks entered. The systems were simple because ownership no longer depended on silence. At the program's annual dinner, a new resident asked Caroline what happened to the man who once lived in the villa. Caroline considered the question. Caroline looked around the library. Women filled every chair. Contracts and business plans covered the tables. The house carried voices without hiding any of them. "I care that this works," she said. That was the final answer. Grant's happiness, regret, success, or failure no longer determined the value of Caroline's choices. The villa stood. The company stood. The women inside both institutions knew where they belonged. Caroline raised her glass to the room. No one toasted revenge. They toasted clear names, open doors, and futures no one else could sign away. The fellowship system faced its first emergency during a winter storm. A resident named Julia received a message from the estate gate. A man claiming to be her husband had arrived with a marriage certificate and requested access to her room. He said Julia had taken family financial records and was emotionally unstable. At another residence, those words might have opened a door. The Arden estate policy required direct resident consent. Julia refused. The gate remained closed. Her husband called police and claimed the house was hiding stolen property. Caroline's legal clinic met officers at the entrance. Julia provided her room agreement, protective filing, and inventory showing the financial records belonged to her business. Her husband produced a company authorization bearing Julia's electronic signature. She had never signed it. The document attempted to transfer her business voting rights to him. Caroline recognized the shape immediately. Not the names, not the company. The shape. A relationship used to bypass ownership. A signature treated as a future formality. A woman described as emotional before she could object. The officers preserved the document. Julia's attorney filed an emergency notice before morning. The gate remained closed throughout the storm. The next day, Julia's business partner confirmed that her husband had tried to submit the transfer while she stayed at Arden Estate. He believed separation gave him authority to protect the company. The filing was rejected. The forged authorization entered a formal investigation. Julia retained her shares. Her company remained open. No hidden fortune rescued her. No billionaire father purchased the opposition. The protection came from clear records, a locked gate, trained staff, and a woman who had learned to say no before someone else defined the situation. Caroline met Julia in the library after the hearing. "I almost signed the original form last year," Julia said. On the table between them lay the fellowship binder: property, equity, and consent. Julia had recognized the transfer language from Caroline's anonymized example. One unsigned page had protected another woman years later. The incident led to a new emergency protocol. Residents could upload deeds, shareholder records, identity documents, and protective contacts into secure storage. Gate staff received training on marital status claims. Police liaison officers visited twice a year to review access rules. The protocol did not assume every spouse was dangerous. It assumed no spouse automatically spoke for another adult. The first audit found 2 expired contacts and 1 weak password. They were corrected. No dramatic ceremony followed. The system simply improved. In spring, Julia returned to Arden Estate as a guest lecturer. She stood inside the former master bedroom, now the library, and explained how to recognize a disguised share transfer. Caroline sat near the back. Julia held up the rejected form. The residents marked the dangerous clauses. After the session, Julia placed a copy inside the training archive beside Caroline's anonymized document. 2 different companies, 2 different marriages, the same attempted erasure. Both signatures remained blank. That evening, Caroline walked to the front gate. The estate manager tested the intercom and access log. Every authorized resident appeared correctly. No borrowed profile remained active. Caroline placed her hand against the fingerprint reader. The gate opened. Years earlier, the same gate had admitted her to a truth she never wanted to see. Now it protected women while they decided what happened next. Caroline closed it again and returned to the house. Inside, the library lights glowed through the windows. The villa had once been a place where Grant believed Caroline's absence gave him ownership. It had become a place built on the opposite rule. Absence was not consent. Silence was not surrender. Love was not a deed, a vote, a signature, or a key. Caroline entered the library and closed the door against the cold. The house was full. Every woman inside it had her own name on the record. At 2 a.m, Caroline completed the final security review and walked upstairs. The restored silk robe rested against her shoulders, its gold seam catching the light. She paused outside the library that had once been her bedroom. Julia's unsigned transfer form lay in the training archive beside Caroline's own. Neither document had taken effect. That mattered more than every headline about Grant's fall. Downstairs, the estate manager locked the public entrance. Emergency contacts remained current. The gate log showed no unauthorized guest. Caroline opened her bedroom window. Cold air moved through the curtains. Years earlier, she had returned at the same hour with a suitcase, expecting to surprise her husband. Instead, she discovered that he had filled her house with another woman, false promises, and plans carrying Caroline's name without her consent. Now the house held accurate agreements, independent keys, and women who knew where their signatures belonged. Caroline switched off the lamp. She did not need Grant to regret losing her. She did not need Sienna to envy the life she rebuilt. She needed only the quiet certainty that no one would ever again use Caroline's absence as permission. The gate was closed. The records were clear. The house was safe. Caroline slept. Subscribe for more stories about quiet women, hidden power, and the moment betrayal meets consequences.